I'm Lauren Mitchell, 39, from Nashville, Tennessee. I died for 13 minutes, and what I saw during those minutes changed everything.
I know that sounds impossible, but what I experienced in those 13 minutes changed everything I thought I knew about God, myself, and the subtle sins that can destroy a soul. I want to share it with you because it is something every Christian needs to hear. I grew up in church. My parents were devoted members of our Southern Baptist congregation, and I followed in their footsteps without question. From childhood, I memorized scripture, sang in the choir, and helped with church bake sales and charity events. By adulthood, I led our women's ministry, organized Bible studies, counseled young women, and volunteered tirelessly. I had a reputation for being dependable, devout, and an example to follow. People often asked me for advice about faith and marriage. I smiled, nodded, and taught lessons about humility, grace, and forgiveness. But behind the polished exterior, there was something darker: pride, quiet, invisible, dangerous. I judged those around me without realizing it. I compared myself to other women in the church, subtly measuring my holiness against their failures. I told myself I was better than them, not cruelly but quietly, as if my devotion alone gave me the right to look down. I prayed, I served, I taught, I read my Bible daily, I even fasted occasionally. I told myself I was humble, but in reality, I was blind. I judged my husband silently, expecting him to lead spiritually while he struggled quietly with his own challenges. I found myself frustrated with my sister, who never seemed to live up to my standard of faith. I did not see how much pride had crept into my heart. Have you ever thought you were good enough but somehow not fully right with God? That hollow feeling that your faith is strong, yet something in your heart is off. That was me. I had no idea that pride, something so small, so innocent in my eyes, could be the very sin that condemns souls. I thought I was untouchable, protected by my good works and faith. I was wrong. It all came crashing down one ordinary evening in my living room: an argument with my husband, a sudden chest pain, and then nothing. Darkness, silence, and the terrifying realization that I was no longer in my body. What happened next is something I cannot fully put into words, and yet, I must try. Because the moment Jesus appeared, he showed me a truth that shook me to my core, a truth about pride that I wish every believer could see before it is too late. When my chest tightened and the world went silent, I had no idea that those 13 minutes would force me to confront what I had spent decades ignoring. But before that moment, my life looked perfect, on the outside, at least. I was a wife, a ministry leader, a friend. I had a routine, and everything I touched seemed blessed. Yet behind closed doors, the cracks were widening. My husband David had grown distant over the years, exhausted by my constant judgment, my subtle criticisms, disguised as guidance. I told myself I was helping, that I was guiding him toward God. But in reality, I was silently resenting him for not meeting my expectations. Then there was my sister, Rachel. We had grown up inseparable, sharing secrets, dreams, and church pews. But as adults, our relationship had become strained. A disagreement over family responsibilities years ago left a bitter wound that I never truly forgave. Every interaction felt like a test, a reminder that she had failed me, and yet I smiled and acted as if everything was fine. Pride made me blind to her heart, just as it had blinded me to mine. Even with my friends at church, I noticed small flaws, whispered complaints, comparisons. I told myself I was helping them grow, but the truth was, I wanted to feel superior, to feel safe in my self-righteousness. I could teach forgiveness, preach grace, and counsel humility. But when it came to practicing these truths in my own life, I faltered. I tried to cope. I prayed longer prayers, spent more hours in Bible study, attended conferences, and listened to sermons on humility and love. I even journaled, confessing sins I thought were minor. Yet my heart remained restless, uneasy. I was a living contradiction, teaching the very lessons I refused to live. I had built walls of pride that hid my faults, and they were growing taller every day. Looking back, I can see the signs I missed. The quiet anger that flared when someone disagreed with me, the impatient thoughts that passed unnoticed while I smiled in fellowship, the moments I judged others' mistakes more harshly than my own. They were all warnings, whispers from God that pride was taking root in my soul. But I ignored them. I convinced myself I was strong in faith, protected by my good works and devotion. Little did I know that God had been waiting for me to see the truth, waiting for that moment when life itself would stop me cold and force me to face who I really was inside. It was not until my body went still, the paramedics rushed in, and the flatline monitor's cold beeping filled the hospital room that I understood. All my outward holiness meant nothing if my heart was not surrendered. And in that silence, alone and hovering somewhere between life and death, I felt the weight of every judgment, every prideful thought, every unspoken resentment I had ever carried. It was terrifying, and I was about to see the consequences of that pride more clearly than I could have imagined. After the chest pain hit, after the darkness, I remember flashes of my life, like a montage of both pride and devotion, and I could see the pattern I had been blind to. I had spent years building a reputation of holiness while silently measuring myself against everyone else, quietly judging them, quietly resenting them, quietly elevating myself. Even before that evening, my daily life had begun to feel heavy, like a pressure I could not shake. I woke early, drank my coffee while scrolling through church emails, planning meetings, and checking on women in my ministry. I smiled, offered advice, prayed with them, but each interaction carried a hidden weight. I expected perfection from others, and yet I excused my own flaws. I remember the day vividly, when I sat in the church office after a morning Bible study. A young woman confided in me about her struggles with sin. I nodded, offered guidance, and smiled encouragingly, but inside, a thought flickered. I would never make that mistake. I am stronger than she is. That thought, fleeting as it seemed, gnawed at my soul. Even my family life was under the same quiet tension. David tried to talk to me about his worries, about his need for support. I listened, nodded, gave advice, but the judgment in my heart never left. My pride made me believe I was guiding him toward righteousness, but the truth was far harsher. I was putting myself above him, above his struggles, above God's design for humility and grace. Small moments accumulated like invisible cracks, a sarcastic comment to a friend, impatience with my sister's choices, irritation at church members I deemed less committed. I prayed, yes, but my prayers were sometimes hollow, like words spoken to keep appearances. I attended seminars, read devotionals, even memorized scripture on forgiveness, yet nothing touched the pride lodged deep in my heart. And then came that evening, the argument with David, the sudden tightness in my chest, the panic that gripped me as I realized something was horribly wrong. My mind raced through the mistakes I had made, the pride I had carried, the judgments I had passed. In that instant I felt a heaviness I had never experienced, like my heart was being weighed against a standard I had long ignored. I wondered, have I truly loved God above my own sense of righteousness, or have I been building my faith like a fortress to hide my pride? It was a question I could not answer yet, but the universe, or perhaps God himself, was about to provide an answer far beyond my comprehension. That answer would not come gently. It would come through silence, darkness, and the terrifying stillness of death. The moment my heart stopped, I was no longer bound by earthly concerns, but the reckoning I faced next would pierce the very core of who I thought I was. The world went silent. One moment, I was gripping the edge of the living room couch, chest burning, heart racing with fear, and the next, nothing. No light, no sound, no weight. I was no longer in my body, but hovering somewhere in between life and death, suspended in a void that stretched endlessly. At first I thought I was dreaming. Then I remembered my heart had stopped. 13 minutes of stillness. 13 minutes that would change everything. I tried to move, to call out, but my voice was gone. My body felt distant, unreal. I could see David and the paramedics working frantically below me, chest compressions, beeping monitors, his terrified face, the fluorescent lights flickering above. Panic rose in me like a tidal wave. Am I dying? Is this the end? Fear clawed at my chest harder than the pain ever had. I wanted to escape, to pull back into the world of the living, but something invisible held me suspended, forcing me to face the truth I had avoided all my life. And then it began. Images of my life flashed before me, not like a movie reel, but raw, unfiltered, sharper than memory could ever render. I saw my judgmental thoughts toward my sister, my impatience with David, my subtle pride over others in the church. Each thought, each unspoken criticism, each self-righteous glance toward someone I deemed less devoted, rose like smoke, twisting around me. I could feel their weight, pressing down, heavy, suffocating, unbearable. A voice, low and authoritative, echoed in the void. Not angry, not threatening, but piercing. Lauren Mitchell, do you see the truth of your heart? I wanted to hide. I wanted to turn away to ignore it, but I couldn't. Every hidden resentment, every quiet moment of pride, every time I told myself I was better than someone else, it was all laid bare. My soul felt raw, exposed, trembling with terror. I understood now what pride truly was, an invisible sin that blinds the heart, one that I had carried without realizing it, one that had separated me from the humility God required. I floated deeper into the void, and the darkness thickened. Shadows formed around me, shapes of people, faceless, yet familiar, writhing in a kind of torment I had never imagined. I recognized them not by their features, but by their sins, pride, anger, jealousy, unforgiveness. And then it hit me, the truth I had always feared but never admitted. I was not separate from this. My pride, my self-righteousness, had placed me dangerously close. The air, or whatever it was, grew colder. I felt a pulling, a pressure as if I were being drawn toward a cliff with no bottom, a sensation of falling, of being swallowed by endless darkness. This is it, I thought. This is the consequence of pride. My chest tightened again, not physically, but spiritually. My heart screamed in a way I had never known, begging for mercy, for forgiveness, for escape. And then, a light, not harsh, not blinding, but radiant, enveloping, warm. It pulsed gently, yet it held authority, a presence I recognized instantly. Love, but also absolute truth. The void began to recede, shadows writhing and screaming as they faded, and through that light I saw him, Jesus. Not distant, not abstract, but there, watching, seeing, piercing the very fibers of my soul. Fear surged again, mingled with awe. I wanted to flee, but something in me knew I could not. The light drew me closer, and with it came revelation. Every hidden sin, every judgment, every prideful thought I had excused myself for, I could see how they mattered, how even small sins in my heart could have eternal consequences. I tried to explain it to myself, to rationalize. I am a good Christian, I lead ministry, I teach grace, surely he will forgive me. But the presence made it clear. Pride is deceptive. It is the sin that can undo all the good you do if it rules your heart. James 4:6 came to mind. God resists the proud but gives grace to the humble. I had been resisting him, not intentionally, but by elevating myself above others. Tears streamed from a face I could not see but could feel. My soul trembled as visions surrounded me. Millions of people, seemingly innocent, carried by sins they ignored, hidden in hearts that looked righteous to the world, but were far from God. I realized then, pride is silent, seductive, and it can destroy without anyone noticing. I felt an almost unbearable guilt. My own life flashed again, moments when I could have spoken words of humility instead of judgment, moments when I could have forgave, but did not. My heart ached with shame. I was so close to eternal separation, so close to joining those shadows writhing in torment, and yet I sensed mercy, a chance to return, to act, to change. But first, I had to fully confront myself. I had to admit every hidden sin, every quiet, prideful thought, every subtle way I had elevated myself. I was terrified. I wanted to close my eyes, to pretend none of this mattered. Yet the presence of Jesus held me still, unwavering, compelling me to face the full weight of my soul. And as I hovered there, suspended between eternity and life, I realized the truth that would forever haunt me. Pride is invisible, unnoticed, often excused as confidence or diligence, but it is deadly, and I had carried it all my life, blissfully unaware. The question echoed in my mind, sharper than any voice: will you let pride destroy you before God forces you to see it? I could feel the pull toward the light, a choice forming: surrender, humility, and a return to life, or remain in the shadows and face the consequences. My soul trembled, heart aching, knowing that everything I thought I controlled was nothing before God's gaze. I was about to make a choice that would decide more than my life. I floated closer to the light, my soul trembling, my mind racing. The pull was gentle, yet undeniable, a force that I could neither resist nor escape. Shadows still lingered behind me, writhing silently, but the warmth of the presence ahead called me forward. I could feel it in every fiber of my being, an authority beyond comprehension, yet infinitely loving. And then, I saw him. Jesus, not as an image I had imagined in Sunday school, but radiant, alive, and aware of every hidden corner of my heart. His eyes, so full of love, yet piercing through the veils I had built, fixed on me. I wanted to shrink away, to hide from his gaze, but I could not. It was as if my soul had nowhere to flee. Lauren Mitchell, do you see what you have carried? His voice resonated inside me, calm but unwavering, gentle yet filled with truth. I shook, tears streaming, words failing me. Every memory, every thought I had excused, every prideful glance and judgmental whisper rose before him like a mirror I could not close. I saw my life from a perspective I had never considered, the moments I had believed I was better than others, the times I had judged instead of loved, the countless tiny acts of self-righteousness that I had dismissed as harmless. He showed me the consequences, not as punishment, but as revelation. I glimpsed souls around me. Some I had loved, some I had barely noticed, all affected by pride, all vulnerable to the silent sin I had carried myself. And I understood the terrible power of pride. It is invisible, seductive, insidious. It disguises itself as devotion, confidence, even righteousness, but it isolates, blinds, and can destroy. Tears burned my eyes as his presence enveloped me. I felt both awe and terror. I realized, in that moment, how close I had been to eternal separation. My outward ministry, my perfect Sunday smiles, my teaching of humility and grace, all meaningless if my heart remained cloaked in self-righteousness. Then, he spoke words I will never forget. God resists the proud, Lauren, but I give grace to the humble. Humble your heart, release your judgment, love without measure, and you will find your way. James 4:6 echoed in my mind, but now it burned with understanding. I had memorized the verse for years. Now I lived it, its weight settling deep into my soul. I wanted to speak, to beg, to explain, but words seemed small. Instead, I felt a wave of recognition and repentance flood through me. My pride, my self-righteousness, my hidden judgments, all of it spilled before him, unmasked, trembling in the light of his gaze. And in that moment I understood humility for the first time, not as an abstract concept, not as a lesson to teach, but as a surrender, a release, a realignment of my heart with God's. Visions swirled around me, lives touched, sins forgiven, hearts transformed. I saw the women I had led, some struggling silently with the same pride I had carried. I saw my husband, my sister, my friends, and the ripple effect of my humility, or lack thereof, on their lives. I realized that the grace I had sought for myself was now available to them as well. And then the question came, quiet but powerful: will you return and live differently, Lauren? Or will you cling to the old self that almost lost everything? I wanted to stay in the light, to linger in awe, but I knew the choice was mine. My chest ached, not physically but spiritually. I felt a pull toward life, toward a second chance, toward the painful work of humility and reconciliation. I wanted to change, but I also knew it would not be easy. The sins of pride are subtle, woven into thoughts, words, and actions, but now I could see them. Now I could name them. I wanted to ask him, how do I fix everything? How do I undo all the pride I carried? And his reply was simple: by surrender, by love, by honesty, by walking humbly, one choice at a time. In that moment, I repented, not just in words, but in every corner of my being. I felt a weight lift as light filled me, as understanding replaced blindness. The shadows behind me no longer threatened. They were still there, yes, but powerless in the face of truth and grace. As I prepared to return, I felt a sense of urgency. Life awaited me, and with it the responsibility to act. The message was clear: pride is silent, deadly and subtle, but grace is louder, brighter, and available to all who will humble themselves. I took a breath I did not know I was holding. I felt myself drawn back to my body, to the hospital monitors, to the hands of the paramedics still pressing on my chest. I carried with me not only the knowledge of what pride could do, but the revelation of what humility and surrender could accomplish. And I knew deep in my soul that my life would never be the same. The next thing I knew, I was back in my body, back in the cold, bright hospital room. The monitors beeped erratically, the paramedics' hands pressed on my chest, and the fluorescent lights reflected off the sterile white walls. I gasped, lungs burning, heart pounding, as if trying to catch up with the 13 minutes it had skipped. I could hear David's frantic voice, calling my name, tears in his tone, his hand held mine, trembling. Lauren, Lauren, you are better. Relief washed over him, and yet I could feel the weight of what I had just experienced pressing down on me. I was alive, yes, but nothing felt normal. Nothing could ever be the same. I tried to speak, but my throat felt raw, my words caught between the terror I had faced and the awe I still carried. I could only squeeze David's hand, letting him know in silence that I understood life had been handed back to me, and with it a responsibility I could not ignore. The doctors moved quickly, checking vitals, murmuring about a miraculous recovery, but the miracle was not in the equipment, the medicines, or the intervention. The miracle was what had happened inside me, in those 13 minutes, where pride had been revealed, and grace had found me at my weakest point. I lay in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to process the images of the shadows, the void and the radiant presence of Jesus. His voice, his gaze, the truth about pride. I could not shake it. I realized that coming back to life was not a reward. It was a second chance to live differently, to act humbly, to reconcile, and to embody what I had only preached before. Recovery was slow. My body ached from the trauma, my chest still tender, my mind restless. But the hardest part was not physical, it was spiritual. Every heartbeat reminded me of what I had narrowly escaped. Every glance at David, at my sister, at my friends reminded me of the pride I had carried. I knew I had to change, not just in words but in the choices I made daily. I began small, an apology to David for the judgments I had held silently, a phone call to my sister to mend old wounds, moments of humility during Bible study where I admitted I was learning too. Each step was difficult, uncomfortable, yet liberating. I felt lighter, freer, and more aware of the silent battles that pride wages inside every Christian heart. And as I sat in that hospital bed, hearing the soft beeping of the monitors, I made a silent vow. I would never again assume my righteousness gave me authority over others. I would walk humbly, love actively, forgive deeply, and teach not from pride, but from the hard-earned lessons of my own brokenness. I had returned to life, but I was not the same. The experience had burned away the facade, leaving only the raw, real and fragile heart of someone who had seen eternity and returned changed. Returning home from the hospital was surreal. Everything seemed familiar, the beige walls of our living room, the smell of David's cologne, the soft hum of the refrigerator, but I felt like a stranger in my own life. The person who had lived here before me was gone, replaced by someone who had seen the abyss and returned with a new understanding. The first conversation was with David. I found him in the kitchen, quietly sitting with his hands folded, eyes red from worry and relief. I took a deep breath, my voice trembling. David, I see now what I have done. All the times I judged, all the times I assumed I knew better. I was wrong. I am sorry. He stared, searching my face, and then tears spilled down his cheeks. Lauren, I thought I had lost you. I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. That moment, the silence between us, carried more weight than any sermon I had ever delivered. Humility, I realized, was not just an idea. It was a bridge, and we were standing on it together. Next was my sister, Rachel. The phone call felt awkward at first. Rachel, I need to apologize. I carried pride and judgment between us for far too long. I was blind. Her voice cracked, and she hesitated before replying. Lauren, I have missed you. I have prayed for us. We spoke for hours, revisiting old wounds, sharing tears, and slowly rebuilding trust. Pride had kept us apart for years, and humility was finally knitting us together again. In the church, I began to step down from certain leadership duties, not out of guilt, but from understanding my limitations and my need to walk humbly. During women's ministry meetings, I started to admit mistakes openly, to confess moments of pride I had previously hidden, and to ask others for their insights and forgiveness. It was uncomfortable, exposing, and yet freeing. There were setbacks, old habits, The faint urge to compare myself, to measure my devotion against others, still crept in. I had to consciously pause, pray, and realign my thoughts, reminding myself that grace is earned not by appearances, but by humility. Each conversation, each act of apology, each honest confession chipped away at the fortress of self-righteousness I had built. I also reached out to friends I had subtly judged over the years, admitting my pride and asking for their forgiveness. Some were surprised, some skeptical, some relieved, but every conversation deepened my understanding of love in action. Pride is subtle, but its undoing requires courage and honesty. Every step of reconciliation brought clarity. Pride isolates, humility connects, judgment separates, grace restores. I was learning to embody the lessons I had once only taught. Every relationship I repaired, every apology I made, was a reminder that transformation is a choice, a daily, conscious, and sometimes painful choice. I began to understand fully that the NDE was not just about seeing eternity, it was a call to live differently, to walk humbly, to love without conditions, to forgive genuinely, and to lead by example, not from self-righteousness, but from grace earned through vulnerability and obedience. Months have passed since that day in the hospital, since the moment I saw the truth of my heart and the weight of pride. Life has returned, yet it feels profoundly different. Every morning, I wake with a quiet awareness of the choice I made to return to walk humbly, to release judgment, and to embrace grace. In my church, in Bible studies, in conversations with friends, I have begun sharing my testimony, not as someone who is perfect, but as someone who has been confronted by eternity and forced to change. I tell them about pride, how it disguises itself as righteousness, and how easily it can lead even the most devoted Christians astray. I speak of the shadows, the void, the radiant presence of Jesus, and how humility opened the door to life again. Teaching has become more personal, more vulnerable. I no longer present myself as someone above mistakes. Instead, I share moments of failure, hesitation, and hidden judgment. I see others lean in, nodding, some with tears, some with recognition in their eyes. They understand because they have walked similar paths. Pride is subtle, but it is universal, and the call to humility resonates deeply. I also continue repairing relationships. My husband and I walk with intentional love, acknowledging moments when pride threatens our connection. My sister and I meet regularly, no longer carrying old resentments, but building trust and honesty. And in the ministry, I encourage women to examine their hearts, to confess silently and openly, and to act with compassion rather than judgment. Sometimes, I catch myself quietly measuring, quietly comparing, but those moments are no longer a trap. Now I pause, pray, and let grace guide my response. Every choice toward humility feels like a victory, a reminder that the NDE was not just an event, it was a mandate, a mirror, a lesson that I am called to live out every day. I reflect often how many Christians never recognize the silent sin of pride in their heart, how many present a facade of holiness while unknowingly carrying a weight that can separate them from God's presence. This reflection is not to judge, but to awaken. I ask myself, and I ask you, how often do we let self-righteousness rule our action? How often do we overlook grace in favor of appearances? The answer is not simple. It is daily, conscious, and sometimes uncomfortable, but it is necessary. Humility is not weakness, it is strength under God. Pride is not harmless, it is dead, and grace is not limited. It is freely available to all who will lay down their self-righteousness and surrender fully to God's truth. I invite you to examine your own heart. Have you allowed pride to disguise itself as goodness? Have you withheld forgiveness, judgment, or love in subtle ways? Comment below if you have struggled with this. Let us start a conversation, not to shame, but to awaken hearts to humility. I am Lauren Mitchell. I died for 13 minutes, and I returned with the vision of eternity. Pride nearly cost me everything, but grace restored me. Now I live differently, love more deeply, and walk humbly before God every day, and I pray my story will inspire you to do the same. I lived, I saw the truth of my heart, and I nearly lost everything to pride. 13 minutes in the darkness showed me what so many of us ignore. Our good enough can be deadly. I want to ask you, be honest, how often do you let pride hide behind your faith? How often do you think you are better than someone else, while God sees it all? I want to know, do you think humility is really possible in a world obsessed with appearances, or is pride just part of being human? Comment below. I am ready to read your truth. Curious about others who returned from the edge of death with life-changing revelations? Watch more NDE stories that reveal the truth. Do not miss what's next. Our upcoming video dives deeper. Share your story to inspire others and subscribe now to witness